Good evening. I'm Nan Geschke, your host of the Los Altos History Show. This evening's guest is Eleanor Cameron. Welcome to the History Show, Eleanor. We're so pleased to have you as our guest tonight.
Thank you, Nan. It's lovely to be here.
Well, we're so thrilled to have you. Eleanor Cameron has lived a very interesting, full life. She was raised in this area, and she's lived through many changes, not only in her own life, but also in the life of Los Altos. And we're so excited to be able to share with you the very special life of Eleanor Cranston Fowle Cameron. Thank you for coming again, Eleanor. And I know that your roots go back to your grandfather, is that correct? As a native daughter of California?
Yes, native granddaughter.
Great native granddaughter, okay. So what can you tell us about your grandfather?
He came out here from Canada on the first transcontinental train in 1870, 1 year after the Golden Spike was driven from a farm in Canada where his ancestors had come from Scotland. And he came out here. He had hated farming, and so he became a carpenter, and then gradually began to build wonderful Victorian houses and became known as a leading architect. And I remember when I was a child, my mother taking me on a cable car in San Francisco past a row of his beautiful Victorians, all different colors, like different stamps in a row in an album.
Oh, wow. Now, Eleanor was nice enough to lend me her photo album, and I was able to put quite a few of them up on our monitor. And I think the first photo that we have on the monitor tonight is of your grandfather, Robert Dickey Cranston. And also, I think we have another photo of one of his Victorians. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Well, I think we can bring that up on the monitor now. There it is.
Yeah, that's the house that my parents were married in.
Oh, it is?
That was one of their houses that they lived in.
Now, what about your parents, Eleanor? Your mother and father both born in California?
Both born in California. My father in Yountville, which sounds like Little Abner, and my mother in Sacramento, where her father was a prominent physician.
And so how did they meet?
Father and mother met at Stanford in something called Mrs. North's boarding house. It was a very special boarding house set up by Senator Phelan for a friend of his who had been widowed. So they met there.
I think we have a couple of early photographs of your parents, William and Carol, coming up on the screen right now. Very handsome, very energetic looking people. They look like they had a lot of life.
My mother was really very pretty, prettier than that picture.
And also there's a wonderful picture of them on the Stanford campus. I think that we can bring that up on the monitor as well. It looks like your mother is stepping off of a stile. Isn't that a wonderful picture?
Yes. She was quite small.
I love her hat. Yeah. Now, you were born in Palo Alto, and I know that your family, you said your father had lost his fortune in the earthquake?
Well, it wasn't a fortune. There were hard times in those days in San Francisco, but he started out in the real estate business. He'd meant to be a lawyer, but when he fell in love with my mother, he had to give up that ambition, and he went into real estate with his father. But the earthquake and fire of 1906 burned the city, and they lost everything they had except their personal possessions in a flat that they were renting. So they started over again in Palo Alto, probably in what's now East Palo Alto, and they lived on a farm. My father milked a cow, tended vegetables, and began to sell real estate from the seat of a bicycle.
And that's where you were born, as well as your brother?
Well, no, we then got a house on Copper Street, where I was born, and Alan was born too. And I remember, that's my earliest memory, the day that he was born, when I was 4.
Oh, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, after living a few years in Palo Alto, your family decided to move to Los Altos.
Yes, it was the same year that Alan was born that they bought the farm that they called the Red Barn because of a wonderful old red barn on it. And it was the Windbigler Hill, which most people around here are familiar with,
yes,
because it's a gray French chateau sitting up on the top of a hill. And it was a wonderful place with 13 acres of orchard, apricots and apples and prunes, 3 different orchards, and a wonderful view of the hills, just like the one behind us. Nothing, no houses, just hills. And the same on the other side, beautiful open country all the way to the bay.
Oh, that's marvelous. Now, I think we're bringing up a picture of that red barn on the monitor now. That's the home. And you said, you told me in an earlier conversation that you thought perhaps Gilbert Smith may have been the carpenter on this home.
I think so, because it was very similar to History House. It had the same dormer windows, stone fireplace, and a winding staircase that went up behind the stone fireplace to 2 bedrooms upstairs, and it had beaver board and wooden floors, lots and lots of similarities.
Lots of similarities to History House. Now, I think we have another picture coming up soon of Eleanor and Alan on a horse, one of your plow horses at the Red Barn. It's a wonderful picture of you, Eleanor.
It was also our buggy horse, and the only way we had to get anywhere was in a horse and buggy. So we used to go down to Los Altos that way. And when we were on the hill, we were often marooned in the wintertime when there was a lot of rain, and the creek would flood, and we would look down on this spreading lake of brown water and know we couldn't get off our hill for days.
Oh, I know. And then you said the Adobe Creek was a raging torrent in those days.
It was. It ran all the year round.
Isn't that unbelievable? And I think the last picture we have in this set is of the Windbigler estate as it looks today. And that's what you can see off of Fremont Road if you go up towards the Los Altos Hills courthouse, or the Civic Center there. That's right. It's right on that road.
We had a beautiful view of the valley. It was just filled with orchards, and it was just as open and empty as the scene behind us.
Right. Now, how long did you live at the Red Barn?
About 8 years.
8 years. And those must have been happy years because you were a young girl at that time. And do you have any special memories about those times? And
well, I remember some hair-raising adventures because there was a time when I was allowed to go down to Los Altos in the horse and buggy with our hired man who was part Indian driving.
Oh, wow.
And we were going down Fremont Road from the Windbigler Hill, which was then our home. And my father and his partner had bought a car for the business, and they came, I think it was perhaps about the first time they'd been out in it, and they came along the road, and there we met, right near the corner of Edith and Fremont, and they asked me if I would like to ride in the car, and of course I said yes. So I started to dismount, and they'd left the engine running, I guess because they were so proud of it, but it scared the horse, and the horse bolted, and I was thrown down under the wheels and run over by the buggy.
Oh, no.
And taken home in my father's arms, wailing, to great shock of my mother.
The troubles on the frontier, huh?
Yes.
Now, from there, I know your father was a realtor in town. Isn't that correct?
That's right.
So he had other plans for the family. There was a move afoot, I understand. So the next family move was to...
He and his partner had sometimes bought property and sold it. And so they bought this place down at the bottom of the hill between the creek and what was then the railroad tracks. The railroad tracks ran along what's now the Foothill Expressway.
Yes.
And they bought the place planning to sell it again, and they divided up the furniture. It had some nice antiques in it. And then my father and mother fell more and more in love with it, so they bought it from the company and moved down there and brought the furniture back to its rightful places.
And what did you call this home?
It was called Villa Warwick, which was made up of our initials, W for William, and A for Alan, R-E for me, Ruth Eleanor, and C for Carol.
Oh, yes. So I think we have a picture on our monitor now. We're going to be bringing it up of Villa Warwick. There it is.
Yeah, I think nowadays there's about 5 houses on that lawn.
I know. I have a friend who lives on that street, and it's hard to sort of get a perspective about how glorious it must have been in those days. And I think we also have some aerial views of Villa Warwick. I think they're bringing it up on the monitor, where you can actually see the little ranch house in the far corner. And you said that actually that may have been a very old Spanish adobe.
Well, it was a frame house, but that and a shed nearby went back to much earlier times, to the times of Juan Prado Mesa, who had the earliest land grant of 4,000 acres.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And I think there's one final aerial view that we have in this set that shows the train tracks, which is now the Foothill Expressway. You sort of can get a feeling of how unpopulated the Los Altos area was at that time.
That was our place on the far side of the tracks, bounded by Adobe Creek, which ran all the year round then. And we used to fish there and dam it up and swim in it.
Oh.
It was wonderful having that creek.
Now, I understand that you went to school in Palo Alto, Castellea School, and that you met your future husband there.
Well, that's true. His sister, Louise, was my best friend at Castellea. She was a boarder, and Jack, my future husband, was away at school, but he came back to live in the house that his parents were building in Los Altos and to go to Stanford. And he would drive Louise into Castellea, and so they picked me up and took me in too. And my mother used to laugh about, she would lean out the window and wave goodbye to me, and I would get in the back seat, but one day the front door was open for me, and Louise had been put in the back seat.
Oh, so and different status, huh?
So
you know, you had gone up in the world.
Yes, our romance had begun.
Oh, that's exciting. So I think we have a picture of both you and, oh, that's a picture of your mother and dad at Villa Warwick.
Yes.
Yeah, we forgot to show that from the last set. But the next pictures up should be of Eleanor and Jack, and right before you were married, or at the time that you were married. So let's bring that up now. Wonderful pictures of both of you. Now, I understand that your husband was an engineer.
Yes, he was a mechanical engineer, and after we were married, we lived in Oakland. And when World War II started, he was given a job at Joshua Handy Iron Works to design a diesel engine for the Navy. And so we moved down to Los Altos again temporarily. We just built a house in Piedmont that was our dream house. But we came down and rented a house from the Darwin Thielitz, and then we began to fall in love with Los Altos again. So we decided to stay, and we had a chance to buy the Easenberg place, where we've lived ever since. It was on Fremont Road, now Old Trace Lane, and near the corner of Fremont and Arastradero, a wonderful Spanish house. And it was then a chicken farm with about 10 long chicken houses and all kinds of other outbuildings. And so my first project was to start getting rid of all the buildings because I didn't want to be in the chicken business. And there I was during the war, unable to get any help at all with 2 infants and this big place to run. And I really had my hands full.
Oh, that's a great story. And I know that your family has been very, very interested in politics, that your father did some political work in Los Altos and also in Palo Alto, I understand. But your brother, Alan Cranston, showed interest in politics at a very early age. How did that all begin, Alan?
Well, my father was always interested in politics. He was a president of the Republican Club in Palo Alto in the early days.
I guess there's a story here between how this family came from Republican roots, Democratic roots.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, and he also was my father was chairman of the War Work Council when World War I began. And we remember World War I. There was a camp called Camp Fremont on the Page Mill Road, where it's now the corner of Foothill Expressway and the Page Mill, and the soldiers used to set off explosions, and we'd hear them and think the war was coming close to home.
Oh.
And
but how did Alan get interested in politics?
Alan, we'd heard a lot about politics all our lives. My father used to read the Literary Digest aloud at night to the whole family. And then once Alan, when he was about 20, I guess, was in sightseeing in Washington, and he went into the Senate and sat in the gallery and became absolutely enthralled. And from then on, his ambition for life was to get into the Senate, but he had a long way to go, and he had to rebuild the Democratic Party in California. People say he was lost in the wilderness for a long, long time before.
Years, probably.
For years, until the time was ripe for the Democrats to take office. They'd been out of office for a long time, but they were swept in. Pat Brown became governor, and Alan became state controller. He wanted to run for the Senate, but it was suggested that he was young and inexperienced. So Claire Engel ran for the Senate, and Alan ran for controller, and they were all elected. It was a sweep.
Now, were you involved in politics yourself in those years?
No, not in those years. I was too busy with the children still, and I had a counselor because I seemed to need one to figure out these teenagers, even in those days. And she advised me to stay home and not get immersed in politics, which I regret.
Oh,
but I did it later.
They wouldn't give you that kind of advice today.
No, that's true. They wouldn't. But I got into it later, and somebody suggested that I run for a local office, which I did. And then they suggested that I run for Northern California Women's Chairman of the state party. And then they suggested I run for state women's chairman, which I did, and I was elected. And then I did that for about 10 or more years and built up something called...
And this is all the while that Alan was in the Senate?
No, that was before he was in the Senate.
Before he was in the Senate.
And he was controller, but then he lost when Reagan made a sweep of the state, and the Democrats were all defeated, including Alan and Pat Brown. But I was still there, and that was when I became women's chairman of the party, and active in many, many campaigns, and on the steering committee of a lot of campaigns, and then later Alan's.
And then later his campaigns. Mm-hmm. You started to get active in politicking with him.
Yes.
I think we have a picture coming up on the monitor now of the celebration after the 1968 election.
That was a wonderful night. My husband is there behind Alan.
Oh, I see him there. And there you are with Alan. Everyone looks radiant.
We were very excited.
Yes. And we also have a picture of Eleanor, of you at that time. I guess this must have been taken when you were Democratic chairwoman. Was that about that time?
That's right. That was then.
Lovely picture of you. Now, I understand that while Alan was in the Senate, you traveled with him, and you've had quite a few adventures, which you'd like to share with us.
Well, that was a wonderful thing, going places with Alan. He was very good about taking us along at our own expense. We always hastened to add.
Yeah.
But because of his being in the Senate, we generally met with heads of state and leading figures in the government. And one of the most, and in Russia, for instance, we were given tours of the Kremlin and taken to see Tolstoy's house. But the most fascinating trip was one to the Middle East, where we met with Begin in his office and Sadat in his villa and King Hussein in his palace.
Oh, what wonderful experiences.
Amazing.
Yes. Now, I know that your first husband also was in politics. He was the second mayor of Los Altos Hills.
That was my first husband.
First husband.
Jack Fowle.
Jack Fowle.
Yes.
And he, so you must have been also involved with local politics.
Yes, that's true. We had many, many bitter fights in Los Altos Hills that have been going on ever since.
I know nothing much changes, does it?
Nothing much changes.
I know. So I know that you lost your first husband and met a man that had been part of your life on the fringes. And what?
Well, we had the same friends. We happened to miss each other at Stanford, just because of circumstances.
And this is Don.
Don Cameron. He left for a couple of years to help out his family, and I left to get married. So we missed each other, but we were practically in the same class. And he had an interesting life as a writer for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer when he first got out of Stanford, and then as a documentary filmmaker for the State Department. Very interesting person that I think I was lucky to have 66 years of happy married life between the two.
Lucky you. I know we have Eleanor was able to find this photograph. I thought maybe the camera could pick that up of she and Don. There they are. Handsome couple.
That shows up well.
Yes, it's a nice picture. Great. Thank you. Now, I know, Eleanor, that you have had a writing career as well as a political career. You established a friendship with Wally Stegner, one of your neighbors, and what can you tell us about that?
Well, the Stegners were dear, dear friends who lived near us, and we've met them because we all had horses in those days. That was, well, during the war, and that was when we met. That was the only good way to get around because gasoline was rationed. So we started a Trails Club, and we used to ride up in Hidden Villa and all over the hills together. And that was how this friendship started. But then Wally later on let me into his creative writing class at Stanford, and that led to my writing the biography of Alan, which is now still available down at Heintzelman's.
This is the book that Eleanor wrote about her brother Alan, and as you said, it's available down at Heintzelman's, so it's still available.
I'd like to make one comment about the difference in Los Altos now. When we were children, it was just one wide main street with about 5 stores and hitching posts on each side, and we would walk to town or else ride down on a plow horse.
And now what it's like. And I remember you telling me about when you lived at the Villa Warwick, you had saddle horses then, and that you used to gallop down Los Altos Avenue.
That was a great treat because the horse loved to run, and I did too, and it was just a wonderful, long, empty dirt road. So the horse would get more and more excited as we got to Los Altos Avenue, and then I would just let the reins loose, and he would just tear from one end to the other.
Now, do you think that Los Altos has changed drastically? Do you see remnants of it from your days as a child, or don't you recognize it at all?
It's just unrecognizable. When we looked out from the hill at the Red Barn, we looked out on the most beautiful view in the world, not only the view of the hills like behind us,
yes,
absolutely empty, but on the other side empty too, all the way to the bay, the scalloping of orchards, and almost no buildings at all. People would come down from San Francisco when they began to have cars and drive through the valley and enjoy the orchards blossoming in the spring.
I know, I heard that was a glorious time. Well, this has been, I can't believe how quickly this time has gone by, Eleanor. I appreciate you coming to share your very, very rich life with us tonight. I wish there were more time so we could go into more of the stories. I know you have a lot of them, and maybe sometime you'll come back and share some more of them. We'd really like that. I want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in tonight, and I hope that you've enjoyed this show and that you'll join us the next time.